I'm Gaurie Dwivedi and welcome to the concluding episode of Inside She's China, The Great Game Plan. In this series, I've covered a long arc of China's past. The tumultuous years that led to its creation, the story of its economic rise, the many wars it fought, and the inner battles it is still fighting under the leadership of its current president, Xi Jinping. This has been a one-of-a-kind documentary series that has demystified the intrigue that has traditionally enveloped China. The series unravels China and its various facets, from the bloody power struggles that have been part of Chinese polity since 1949 to the cracks in its much-touted economic model, to providing insights into the minds of the leaders that shaped China's past and present. In the final episode, we find out what lies ahead for China as Xi Jinping continues his aggressive march. This documentary series has been an exploration of China's past to gauge its future. So in the next decade, will the world continue to witness China's rise, or could it be the decade of China's demise? A lot of this depends on how soon and how efficiently Xi Jinping manages to tide over China's growing fault lines. One of the biggest challenges for the Communist Party is the slowing Chinese economy. From the cadre at the bottom of the leadership pyramid till the General Secretary at the top, the entire CCP machinery is aware that their political legitimacy stems from the vibrancy of the Chinese economy. Slowing growth will weaken the premise of its hold, both within and outside China. Under Xi Jinping, the Chinese economy is breaking a 32-year-old record. In 2022, its economy will officially grow slower than the American economy. The last time it happened was in 1990 in the aftermath of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Slowing economy, stretched banking sector, and the growing likelihood of Hong Kong losing its sheen as a hub for global finance are all part of a larger problem. Just like the ghost towns across China are symptomatic of the larger problem that plagues its overheated property sector, that of misguided economic decisions. Now add to this heady concoction the series of policy changes by Xi Jinping: communist centralization of the economy, crackdown against business tycoons, and a statewide focus away from American-style consumerism. What one gets is an economy that is skating on thin ice. Even the Reds know this.
Xi Jinping is closing China off from the outside world. So as time progresses, we know less and less about what's happening at the top of the Communist Party and through Chinese society in general. This is something that Mao Zedong did. It's also something that Chinese emperors did during 2 millennia of imperial rule. And we know that every time it's occurred, disaster has followed for China and the Chinese people. So unfortunately, there are many things and many critical things that we do not comprehend about China today.
The liberal Zhao Jiang, who was ousted as the General Secretary of the Communist Party in 1989, for advocating dialogue with protesting students at Tiananmen Square, probably summed up China's economic model. Jiang had lamented, "Our biggest problem is that everything is owned by the state." 30 years later, after witnessing a major economic boom after a general loosening of state control, Xi Jinping's policies are aimed at reversing some of these decisions. This means Xi Jinping wants the state to take back parts of the economy from the private sector. State-owned enterprises are the primary vehicles for the Communist Party to control and direct the economy. China's state-owned enterprises already comprise about a third of the entire economy, and any further concentration of economic power in these behemoths will take the sheen off the Chinese economy due to the inefficiency and inherent corruption of the state-owned enterprises. But for the state, these companies are the preferred children. State-owned enterprises receive lower interest rates when they borrow money, they enjoy lower tax rates as compared to private companies, and have access to precious resources. Despite this, state-owned enterprises have a poor track record relative to private companies. For instance, productivity per person in the aluminium sector for China's state-owned enterprises is just 1/7 of their private competitors. Despite some efforts to reform state-owned enterprises over the last few decades, these giant companies have resisted change by using their proximity to power. Instead of being downsized or reformed, these highly inefficient companies are now being elevated. The idea is to increase states' control in economic activity and lead to more concentration of power in just a handful of state-owned companies. Of course, for the CCP, it's far easier to control fewer state-owned large companies than a larger number of smaller private enterprises. The CCP's style of handling the economy through its growth years has been that of choosing its preferred companies and providing them with a variety of benefits. A natural outcome of this process of creating state-favored enterprises has led to an epidemic of overproduction across all major sectors. Till the 2008 financial crisis, this overcapacity was absorbed domestically. But since then, it has become a major factor leading to ever-growing piles of debt. In fact, China's debt is the largest ever recorded for a developing country and has quadrupled from $7 trillion in 2007 to $28 trillion in 2014, and it reached $34 trillion by 2018. China's GDP during this period was $3.55 trillion in 2007 and $12.2 trillion in 2017. So, China added a GDP of $8.6 trillion against a debt of $27 trillion. This was driven by excess capacity. Even now, state-owned enterprises continue to overproduce to pump prime the economy, reaffirming the vicious cycle of debt. Since state-owned enterprises serve political requirements, fiscal prudence is hardly a parameter they are evaluated on. The debt is also a direct consequence of the creation of excessive real estate, an economic problem that is not unique to China but more pronounced in the world's second-largest economy. Ghost towns across China have a story to tell, that of misappropriation, corruption, and excessive speculation. Ghost cities in China have mushroomed due to two main reasons. One is that local governments boost local economies through the real estate sector. As per Open Edition Journal in 2017, the residential sector has replaced the manufacturing sector as the primary driver of most local economies. The real estate sector accounts for 29% of the economy. Therefore, residential and commercial land expands quicker than housing demand.
There's no shortage of corruption at the local government level. The debt, probably doesn't go away right away. They continue to borrow. I think it might require some sort of event, some sort of capital markets event, like a default from a big, especially a big dollar borrower, but even a big default in local currency. There's probably not much room for any sort of crash or event that sort of a black swan event. There's really little room for that because of the of the real estate bubble popping of the middle class debt crisis, the mortgage payment, the delinquencies are high. So look, this isn't just public debt, it's private debt, it's an aging population. There's very little retirement support in this built into the system. The disastrous one-child policy continues to rear its ugly head. And don't forget, you asked about the local level. There's still massive rural poverty in China.
Which takes us to the second reason for the excessive real estate crisis, which is the focus on house ownership in China, which stands at a whopping 90%. This is much higher than the average in developed countries, where savings are rooted to equity markets and debt instruments, and not just pumped into the real estate sector. In China, 90% of residents invest in the real estate sector, and just 7% in the equity markets. In most developed markets, though, 52% citizens own stocks and only 65% have house ownership. This explains the tendency of property markets to become havens for speculation, black money, and corruption. Chinese regulators, on their part, have encouraged speculation by not imposing any housing tax. Given this excessive reliance on the property market for parking of savings and its primary use as a vehicle of speculation rather than housing needs, vacancy rate of Chinese realty is also much higher. At 20%, vacancy rate in China is much more than other developed markets, be it Japan and America. This means 1 in every 5 projects is officially vacant in China. That's why when one travels across Chinese cities, the sheer scale of ghost towns or infrastructure without people inhabiting them becomes so glaring. But this cannot be corrected till the underlying property market remains overvalued and overleveraged. As per Nikkei Asia, China's nominal GDP is 70% of US, but real estate prices are 2.6 times that of America. But it's not just prices. Real estate sector also impacts the banking sector. Property-related loans account for 39% of total outstanding loans at China Construction Bank Corporation and 38% at Bank of China. These are the second largest and the fourth largest banks in China, respectively.
The real estate bubble is starting to burst. You've got, you mentioned a middle class debt crisis. You've seen mortgage boycotts. That probably gets worse before it gets better. This is something that's really unsettling. Now, granted, the central bank has come out and lowered interest rates. That might help. I think they understand that this could get worse before it gets better. But again, with lockdowns and some of the obvious demographic challenges that have been historic, they're not new, but they're only getting worse. Again, getting worse before it gets better with the aging of the population. So a lot of the borrowers in China have never really gone through this. They've only experienced property markets that continue to go up, debt is easily provided. So this could really be unsettling for the Chinese economy, but also for Chinese society.
But it's not just about the economy. As Xi Jinping seeks greater control, what he should be bracing for is more pushback, both at home and abroad. China is perhaps one of the few countries that spends more on policing its own people than on its national defense. Deployment of facial technology, 24/7 cameras, linking of all personal and private data, keeping track of every banking transaction, and constant monitoring of citizens' digital presence comes at a cost. This cost is a whopping $190 billion per year. Between 2007 and 2018, public security costs in China tripled to $193 billion a year. This was 19% more than comparable figures in America, and about a fifth more than China's external defense budget, which stood at $175 billion. So, for the Communist Party of China, the threat from its own people is far more pronounced than any external hostile threat that China may face. Security-related expenditures in sensitive regions such as Xinjiang and Tibet have risen so rapidly that they now exceed the United States average on a per capita PPP basis. As China continues to invest heavily in developing ever more advanced security technologies, even residents living in better economic conditions in large metropolis will start questioning the party. The intrusive facial technology, which China took 10 years to develop, links everything from subway tickets to bank transactions to taxi rides. The organized and vast snooping network that the Communist Party uses to control its people looks perfect, but is waiting to snap if there is one catalyst. That could be social, political, or an economic one. But what seems likely is that every dollar spent on domestic security will cause a pushback. These figures reveal the cost of maintaining stability across China's troubled provinces, and especially in the restive minority regions. The Tibetan Autonomous Region and the Xinjiang region may witness further strain, which will attract immense global outrage. In the post-COVID geopolitical framework, despite state-controlled media and state-monitored internet, crackdowns will alienate China from its leader. Incidentally, Xi Jinping has chosen to remain inside China for more than 2 years since the outbreak of coronavirus pandemic. This is reflective of his parochial view of leading a country in a Mao-style template. Mao had no ties with the West for over 2 decades after China's formation and remained largely in his communist ecosystem. Xi Jinping is trying to follow the similar template. With a tight grip on power and control of all 3 power centers, the party, the presidency, and the military, it is unlikely that Xi Jinping will face a credible challenger. But what he may face is a stronger party apparatus challenging his strongman persona. To survive any such threat, Xi Jinping is likely to resort to increased military belligerence. This could be either in the South China Sea against Japan and Taiwan, or against India in Ladakh, or in the Indian Ocean at the Hambantota port.
Hambantota was a backward region in Sri Lanka. So successive governments sought to develop it, and now the Chinese government provided a loan to develop it. Subsequently, China converted that into an investment. But it is basically a commercial port, and the Sri Lanka government has a naval presence there. There is an industrial zone that hopefully will be built around it. So the sustainability of these projects obviously is important, and that is something the government is keeping an eye on.
Every leader is aware of the larger galvanizing effect that an armed conflict has on the masses. Xi Jinping is no different. Chasing history and desiring a name in record books, provocative gestures in Taiwan seems like a natural corollary. What Mao could not achieve despite winning wars is what Xi Jinping wishes to conquer: Taiwan. Military theatrics will also ensure that the party and its new great helmsmen do not loosen their iron grip over China. It is the future shape that formations like the Quad and the AUKUS may take that will decide whether China's war cry will remain an empty hoax or be more than that. Besides America, it will be India and Japan that will decide the future framework of a concerted pushback to China. Besides being the second and third largest economies in Asia, both these countries pose a direct threat to Xi Jinping's idea of establishing his hegemony all over Asia. Though Xi Jinping's policies are being questioned within China, it does not mean that his presidency is under threat in the immediate future. In all possibility, it will be a weakened Xi Jinping who will rule China after the 20th Party Congress meeting in October 2022. A collective leadership may take the place of the present imperial rule, the kind of response that China's Communist Party had after Mao Zedong's death. Deng Xiaoping brought in collective leadership to dismantle the godlike status of Mao. It remains to be seen whether the Chinese Communist Party will discover another Deng Xiaoping to end the cult of Xi Jinping. If one goes by history, then communist parties have a unique way of dealing with autocrats and dictators. For every Joseph Stalin, there came a Nikita Khrushchev to ruin his legacy and admit the leader's excesses. Time will tell if China discovers its very own Nikita Khrushchev, whose secret speech will start a chain of global events. With that, we wrap up this very special series. Thanks much for watching.